So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about 6 surprising hacks to fast track your ACL recovery. And what I'm going to be covering is 6 things which sometimes get missed because sometimes the focus can be on a small area of the rehab process and sometimes we miss these bigger factors at play. So I want to cover 6 key things and hopefully break some beliefs about what is actually important during the ACL rehab process. So the first one is embracing what you can actually do. When you get injured, it's very easy to adopt almost the identity of someone who is injured. So your identity can shift quite a lot and it's normal, it happens all the time. But what happens usually in that time is that people forget that there's so much you can still be doing, and people seem to focus so much on what they can't do at the expense of what they can do. And when I say things you can do, it's like, well, what training is still on the table for you to do? How could you progress in areas and use this opportunity to push forward in the short term whilst your knee is recovering, whilst you don't have the ability to load it, maybe just pre or post surgery, or if you're not having surgery in those early stages where you can't really do a lot, you're still trying to achieve that range of motion. Other things you can be doing, well, you can train the leg, you can train the upper body, you can train core, you can train mobility. All of those things are on the table. So just making sure that you're always thinking, okay, what can I do? You can also use that time to focus on other performance areas. So for example, focused on your nutrition, focused on challenging some goal setting beliefs or some mindset beliefs in that time as well, and just really helping to set the foundations for long-term success. So when you think about it, yes, you're going to be limited in what you can do, but there's so much you still can do. Thinking as a percentage, if you were to list out all the things you can do and then all the things you can't do, there's a really, really solid list there. At least half of what you were doing before you could probably still do. So think about that. I want to list out all the things that you could still be doing on a daily basis that will help you to continue to move forward, continue to build momentum, continue to build confidence so that you're always feeling like you're progressing, even if it might not be in the areas that you ideally like to because you're injured, but you can still focus on the things which you can still do. I think so. A few examples here. One would be single leg training. Okay, can you get onto this leg press machine and train the other leg? So much research around the bilateral deficit, which suggests that you can maintain or at least reduce the decline of injured side strength by training the other limb, because our central nervous system is still being trained. If we're doing heavy loaded strength training on the opposite side, as long as that's safe to do so, then you're going to reduce the offset of the strength deficit on the other side, so that when you come to begin to build that strength back up again, you're starting from a higher foundation. And also, why would you want to have 2 weak legs if you can just have one? You know, there's nothing wrong with getting that other leg really, really strong so that it's at a really good foundational level, plus you're training the central nervous system at the same time, so that when you do come to then train that injured side, you've built a really good foundation. So that's one example. Another one is upper body training. As long as you've got the setup right and it's safe to do so, you can still, progress on with maximum upper body strength training. There's no reason why you can't do that. So don't be limited in your mindset about what it is you can or can't do during this time. Try and really push forward with that. Another thing I get clients to do is things like ski erg, arms only assault bike, assisted rowing machine based movements. All of those can help you to build some conditioning during this time as well, which is very, very important, because obviously your activity levels are going to drop significantly. You don't want to then decondition during that time. If you can keep your cardiovascular system trained, keep progressing forward on that front, that will be a really positive thing to do as well. And then finally, mobility work. So obviously lower body wise, you're going to be a bit limited on what you can do, but you can still focus in and around that upper body. You can still focus on shoulder mobility. You can focus on thoracic mobilities, that when you come to do other movements, you've worked on that mobility. So your quality of movement, the range of motion in the upper body movements is so much better. So loads of things you can be doing there. So you can focus on single leg training, upper body work, mobility, core development, lots of different things we can focus on, as well as focus on other areas like our nutrition and our mindset, which we'll cover in a second. And the second one, obviously, is that strength training is the cornerstone. So it's the most important thing of all to get right, is to make sure you're strengthening that area really, really effectively. Loads of research would suggest that the re-injury rates can be very high unless criteria are hit. And a lot of those criteria from a physical standpoint are related to how much strength your leg, your knee can tolerate and produce. So examples of this would be, how much force can you produce on a single leg? How much capacity has your calf got? How strong are your hamstrings? How much force can you produce in a single leg jump? How far can you hop? How far can you jump? How high can you jump? All of those things are very important markers of the success of the rehab process. So as well as having some other areas we're going to talk about here, always be mindful that the cornerstone of all of this is really effective strength training. All the other areas I'm going to talk about are just going to feed into this and help you to ensure that you're moving forwards and being really productive with the training that you're doing. Be mindful of the type of training you're doing. When you're looking at strength training, always focus on key criteria and key targets every phase you're working through. There's a reason why we break it into 5 different phases, just making sure that each phase you've got something very specific you're working towards. Is it a range of motion target? Is it a capacity target? Is it a strength number? Is it an asymmetry number, the difference between the left and the right side? Be really clear on what those numbers are and how strength training is going to get you there, using exercises that are laser focused on those key numbers you're trying to chase after. So rather than trying to channel your energy in multiple ways, we've really laser focused on a couple of key criteria, like 3 goals at a time you're working towards, and just really get good at the strength training side of things, being really consistent with that, getting really strong, building muscle, so that you can tolerate the types of training for the next stage coming up. So strength training is the absolute cornerstone of what you're going to do. Really important to get that right. Next is the mindset. It is the forgotten factor. It's the psychological component of the injury process, and so much time can be spent looking at the training side, the strength training, which is the real kind of focus around reducing re-injury risk, that the mindset aspect sometimes gets forgotten. What do we mean by the mindset aspect? Well, we mean the risk of re-injury can always be at the back of your mind. There's a fear of re-injury has been shown to massively increase the risk of future injury. Now, why would that be? Why would it be that if you're more concerned or very concerned about getting injured again when you do return, that you'd be more likely to get injured? There's probably a few factors behind that. One is probably that you're going to be more cautious naturally, so you're going to be moving in different ways. You're not going to be throwing yourself into certain movements, sporting actions. Almost certainly the movement that caused the injury is going to be the thing that's going to be the biggest psychological hurdle to overcome. And another factor is that you probably haven't exposed yourself to the things that caused the injury or the types of movements that you're going to need to do in order to get back to sport. And this is one of the key problems I see with a lot of traditional rehab, is that it prepares people for daily function or normal activity, but as an athlete you're not normal. So what's important to do is to make sure that you are addressing those things and putting yourself in scenarios where you're going to challenge that knee, challenge your body, and overcome those psychological obstacles. Because if you don't, then you're not going to have the confidence. Confidence comes from doing. It comes from evidence that you can do what it is that you want to be able to do. So let's say, for example, you're a netballer and you landed on a single leg and injured your ACL that way with the knee rotating. Have you put yourself in positions where you're landing and having to tolerate forces on a single leg? Have you been doing hopping base movement, drop jumps? Have you been doing loaded single leg jumps? All that kind of thing. Have you done that type of work before? So you're really confident in the knee. It can do what it is that what you're going to be going back to ultimately. The other thing is, of course, that if you haven't, done those things, you're not going to get back to that baseline level. And what you really want to do is go above that level. You want to be stronger than when you got injured. So if you're not doing that, you're not going to have the psychological component there ticked off as well, which is, am I confident, eager, and willing to return to sport? Because if you haven't exposed yourself to those things, it's going to be difficult to do so. Other key aspect of the mindset piece is making sure that you've actually assessed these things as well. So it's not just purely, something which you're thinking about, but you've actually gone through an assessment of your psychological readiness to return. There's a reason why I always put people through, objective, evidence-based assessments of confidence, readiness, because if you haven't done that, then that's a huge part that's missing. You've got to be willing and eager to return to sport. You can't have that hesitation in the knee. You can't be worried that you're going to injure it to a great extent, because if you do have those things, we know the risk of re-injury is going to be high. You've got to be really confident in the knee. You've got to be really eager to get back on the pitch. You've got to feel really good, ready, having gone through each of those different steps, ticked off all the criteria, and go in with absolute confidence you've done all the right work. If you haven't done those things, you're missing a big factor. And just some examples, you could do the Tampa scale of kinesiophobia, which is essentially looking at how confident you are in the knee. And if you've got fear of injuring the knee again, you can do multiple other assessments that we look at But ultimately what you're trying to do is look at, is the knee in a position where you're confident in it? Are you concerned about re-injury? And to what extent are you confident and eager to go back to sport? If you haven't assessed those things, that's a big factor you're missing as well. Next factor then is the nutrition, and ultimately nutrition allows your body to heal. Sometimes, again, through no one's fault, they focus all on the rehab exercises and forget to fuel the body to recover more quickly. In the early stages, you've got to make sure you're getting anti-inflammatory foods on board. You've got to make sure you're getting enough protein on board. You've got to make sure you're getting enough energy on board and not restricting yourself during the rehab process. A common mistake that I see is people restricting themselves when they do get injured by reducing energy intake and reducing protein intake, which is completely counterintuitive. Your body is fighting to heal and it needs energy, it needs protein, it needs anti-inflammatories to help that process. So again, if you're not addressing this, then that's a huge part of the puzzle that you are not addressing. So making sure you're getting on enough energy, enough protein, the right types of foods, and ultimately that you've had guidance from a qualified nutritionist so you know what it is that you should be doing at these different phases. You've got clear guidelines. So again, making sure that your nutrition is on point, it will massively help the rehab process. We know again that if you want to try and reduce the risk of injury, you need to make sure that quadriceps are big enough and strong enough and they haven't atrophied to increase the risk of injury. So if we want to do that, hypertrophy, we need to fuel the body with the right nutrients to enable that process in the body to happen. If you don't take on board enough protein, it's very difficult to achieve those sorts of outcomes. So making sure you're taking on board enough protein as well is vital. And then the next is patience. Ultimately, it's a long process. There will be setbacks, there will be challenges, but just making sure that if you're not looking at the long term and you're not ensuring that you're taking things slow and working through things in a logical sequence, then it will be more frustrating for you. So there's a few things here you can do practically to help improve your patience with this long-term process. The first is to give yourself milestones all the way along. So not just returning to sport, which could be 9 to 12 months, but having small milestones almost on a weekly basis that you can break down to small chunks. You're constantly working towards short-term goals, and that is what ultimately allows you to not get overwhelmed by the long-term aspect of this rehab process. So breaking it down to small chunks will help you to be more patient because you'll feel like you're actually moving forwards on a consistent basis while still working towards that long-term aim. The other one is addressing head-on what those setbacks might be. If you haven't got clear understanding of what those setbacks might look like, how the rehab might have setbacks, how the knee might flare up at certain points, how your mindset and motivation might dip at certain points. If you haven't addressed those head-on early on and given yourself some strategies to cope when they come up, you're not going to be prepared when it happens. So make sure that you're always setting out what those setbacks are going to be. So you've got clear strategies to put in straight away and you know what you're going to do when they come up. Along with that, you can reward yourself. You can reward yourself for achieving milestones with a reward that is healthy and aligned with that goal. So if it's something like it's going back to walking normally without crutches, well, what could you do to reward yourself for walking? Is it going on your favorite walk with your friends, family, partner, whatever it is, taking the dog for a walk if you have a dog? Whatever those things are that align with that goal is going to be very effective, as opposed to something which is counterintuitive, like I'm back walking now, I'm going to go and indulge in unhealthy food, which is going to be counterintuitive to the rehab process. So try to align short-term goals with rewards so that you've got a positive feedback loop to keep you motivated, keep you focused on the short term. So that will keep you moving forwards and not just focus on the longer term aim of getting yourself back to sport. And then finally, it's listen to your body. It's having intuition about what your body needs. It's looking at how it responds to training. It's looking at how it responds to the rehab process and making sure that ultimately you're not doing things that are counterintuitive, that you do listen to what happens. If your knee flares up, don't try to push through that. If you're experiencing more pain than usual, don't try and push through that. Listen to it. And this is where the previous step about being patient, having setbacks in mind before they happen is very important, because you'll know what to do when this comes up. You're like, cool, I've planned for this. I knew this was a possibility. This is the strategy I said I would do. So here's what I'm going to do. An example could be the knee flares up slightly based on some of the exercises you've been doing, which can happen. It can be very normal for that type of thing to happen. And you've said to yourself, when that happens, I'm going to ease back on the exercises I've been given. I'm going to reduce the load on this particular exercise, and I'm going to allow myself an additional day that week just to ease off some of the loading to just let it recover. I'm going to prioritize getting enough sleep, and I'm going to make sure that I'm fueling myself really effectively to help that rehab process and expedite the recovery. Now, if you did those things straight away, you feel good because you said, right, I foresaw this, I sort of saw this coming up, I had a strategy, I implemented these things, and now I'm still moving myself forward. And that's a really good way to have that intuition about your body so that you don't feel like quite as overwhelmed when these things happen, because you've planned for it, you've got a strategy, and you can implement that really, really quickly. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope that's given you some oversight into some key things, some little hacks there that will help you look at the rehab process as a whole and ultimately get yourself to where you want to be faster and with less frustration along the way.